still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. Let freedom ring. It's the American way. And I'm proud to be an American, wearing these stand though I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Hello everybody, I am the Talk Radio Protege, and this is the Protege program coming to you on Saturday because something came up last night and I didn't get to record and upload this video yesterday, but it's here now. Thank you so much for your patience. Let's get right into it. Today I was going to talk about two stories that came to my attention on Thursday, both of them having to do with Republicans versus abortion. But the script ended up being so long, I decided to cut one of those stories out. I'll save it for maybe we'll talk about it some other time. The story we are going to talk about today was introduced to the Texas legislature by a Republican by the name of Tony Tenderholt, called the Abolition of Abortion in Texas Act. From what I can see, this bill does not prohibit Texas citizens from leaving the state of Texas and getting an abortion. This is not the Abolition of Abortions for Texans Act. It specifically abolishes abortions in the state of Texas by legislative penalty. Let's look at what is in the bill, what the bill states, before we get into the rebutting articles, because the biggest issues from the bill come from two paragraphs. The direct link to the PDF is in the description, or you can access the bill from this website, abolishabortiontexas.com. From the first paragraph of actual legal code, this bill would define the beginning of human life as the moment of fertilization upon the fusion of a human spermatozoon with a human ovum. Now, from my research, I believe that this is a little conflation of two issues. However, if you believe that penetration and fertilization happen close enough together that they can pretty much be considered to happen at the same time, this is fine. We will get into the difference between penetration, which I believe is what they're referring to as fusion here, and fertilization, which it could be that they're really referring to fertilization and fusion as the same point in time. It's just a little bit of confusion in the language there that I believe could be exploited. However, it can be argued that fertilization and fusion are the same moment. We'll get into that as we move swiftly along, but the other big paragraph in the bill concerns chapters 19 and 22 of the Texas Penal Code. I went ahead and included both of the paragraphs in the presentation, but they say pretty much the same thing. This bill would amend chapters 1906 and 2212, and you can see the changes that are made there. These two paragraphs would both apply chapters 19, which is the chapter of Texas Legal Code on homicide, and chapter 22, which is the Texas Legal Chapter on assault, would both be applied to scenarios where the mother of the child or a licensed medical practitioner aborted the child, either through something that's not considered assault and also assault that result in an abortion. And because of that first paragraph, I stumbled across this Forbes article, and I want to chase it all the way to the end. So, tangent alert, if you're only concerned about the bill and you're not really concerned about arguing over abortion, you can skip this part. But if you want to hear all about the discussion of abortion specifically as is presented in this article by Mr. Arthur Kaplan, we are going to dig all the way down into it. As it turns out, the left cannot help but admit that life begins at conception. When they do, they bury it behind headlines like dangerous misconception on when life begins and statements like science supports no such view. However, in this article, Arthur Caplan is going to lay out the science that does in fact support such a view, and he is going to admit that in fact life begins at conception. Now, he doesn't do it very well. He ends up arguing about when life begins, and he ends up making an argument about when life begins while he's trying to debunk life beginning at conception, so he kind of fails in that respect. Never mind the fact that in this Senate Judiciary hearing, all the way back in 1981, that 10 different physicians, biologists, and other scientists agreed that human life begins at conception and is a being that is alive and is a member of the human species. Now, Arthur is going to make the distinction between being alive and being a person in this article, but I believe I'm not the most intelligent person on the earth, but I believe that being a member of the human species makes you a person. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is the case. Now let's get into some more of the statements made by Arthur in this article. First, he states that saying that life begins at conception means that we have to end in vitro fertilization. Now, just in case you don't know what that is, in vitro fertilization means you take an egg out of the mother, fertilize it outside of the body, and implant it either in her uterus or usually another woman, the surrogate's uterus. Now, I don't think that Arthur believes that a fertilized egg is not a person unless it's inside a woman's body. I don't believe that Arthur believes life begins at conception in the sense of fertilization, but he certainly seems to be implying that a fertilized egg is not a person if it's not inside a woman's body. I haven't met any quote-unquote conceptionalists that believe a fertilized egg must be inside a woman's body to be a person. I don't think I've met anybody that's making that argument. So I don't see what the problem is fertilizing an egg outside of a woman's body. I don't see what the problem is of it being considered a person outside of a woman's body. So I don't see why calling conception the beginning point of life would end in vitro fertilization. I don't see why calling the beginning point of life conception would have to end in vitro fertilization. It seems preposterous to me. Next, we're going to talk about embryonic stem cell research. If you noticed in that previous statement, I didn't have it highlighted because we weren't talking about it, but Arthur did mention that, I'm going to call it ESC for the rest of this presentation because I don't want to say the full name. ESC research would come to an end if we said life begins at the moment of conception. Now, I would assume that most of my viewers don't watch Oprah, but back in 2009, her friend Dr. Oz made a somewhat controversial statement when he declared that the ESC research debate is dead. Now, I know what you're thinking. Dr. Oz is a buffoon. He has said multiple things that are just stupid. He said multiple sclerosis was a deadly disease, so I don't believe anything he says. Well, fine. He did say in this interview that he believed within single-digit years we would be able to take adult cells and develop stem cells from them. And in 2009, he said that the stem cell debate was dead. In 2010, CBS ran this story where they talked about triggering adult stem cells to regrow body parts and tissue. So maybe Oz was on to something. And what's more, in 2014, scientists successfully cloned embryonic stem cells, ESCs, not adult stem cells, from adult men's skin. If you read this article, it says that they took skin cells from a 77-year-old man and were able to grow ESCs using unfertilized eggs and old men's skin cells. Even if the ESC research debate is not dead. There is no mandate to harvest potential humans in order to harvest ESCs. Now let's conclude with the last part of that statement, that emergency contraception would be brought to an end if we said human life begins at fertilization. Now, I had to do some research to find out what emergency contraception does. As it turns out, apparently it can do one of a couple of things. It can stop the release of an egg, which is what I believe conventional contraception does. Apparently there's emergency contraception that does the same thing. It can stop the sperm from fertilizing the egg, which I didn't know, or it can stop the fertilized egg from implanting, which is what I believed emergency contraception was. By outlawing abortion based on conception, only one of these three possibilities becomes criminal. If you can get a pill that does not prevent a fertilized egg from implanting, then there is no need to outlaw emergency contraception, and I would imagine that such a pill exists. So, moot point, moving on. We spent a lot of time on just that one sentence. I'm going to try to get through these next points a little bit faster. The next assertion made is that someone who kills a pregnant woman at any stage in her pregnancy would be at risk of prosecution for a double homicide. And Arthur acts like this is a bad thing. Should we punish people for killing born alive babies? Should we punish people for purposefully killing unborn babies? Especially when the consent of the parents is non-existent? Why shouldn't we punish people for killing women who are in the early stage of a pregnancy? We already punish people for accidentally or involuntarily killing people. So why not kill people that accidentally kill unborn children? After all, if a couple are trying to become pregnant, the woman is killed in a homicide and they find out that she was actually pregnant, I'm sure the father would be devastated. I'm sure the father would be devastated to learn that not only his wife, but also his unborn child had been killed by this assailant. And this is all the same paragraph, by the way. We finally get to the end of the paragraph, and we have to talk about living wills. Now, in case you didn't know, a living will states whether or not you want to have life support unplugged if you are in a vegetative state. So Arthur wants to say that a dead person's right to die trumps an infant's right to life. Let that sink in for a moment. A dying or dead, however you want to look at it, person's right to die trumps an infant's right to live. Doesn't that sound stupid? Doesn't that sound insane? It does to me. Why should we say your fetus is not viable outside of your body that is in a vegetative state, therefore we are going to kill the both of you? I can't imagine a family that would look at a mother with a baby in her stomach and say, you know, she's already dead. That baby can still grow and be born, but let's kill the mother. I can't imagine that being an actual scenario that comes up. Arthur mentions that the state would determine the woman's medical fate, but really the state is determining the baby's medical fate. If you're in a vegetative state, I believe that it's over. I haven't read of many situations where a person is being kept alive because of life support and they come back and survive. So the state is not intervening on behalf of the woman to decide her medical fate. The state is intervening on behalf of the baby to decide its medical fate. I'm sure that once the baby has been delivered, the woman's body can go ahead and die. I don't think that this is a real argument that people are having right now. Moving right along. Arthur's next declaration is that science offers no bright line on what is conception. He says neither does the Rubio camp. Alright, Arthur, here's a bright line for you. Fertilization is conception. Okay? If I'm not mistaken, this is the opinion of every, as you've already called us, conceptionists. I don't think there are people arguing for the right to life from the moment parents imagine having a child. Here's a bright line, again, from WebMD. Apparently it takes about 24 hours to a sperm cell to fertilize an egg. At the moment of fertilization, the baby's genetic makeup is complete. That seems like a pretty bright line to me. The sperm penetrates the egg. 24 hours later, life has begun. That sounds pretty distinct to me. Are you following this, Arthur? Am I making it clear enough for you? Then he finally admits that life begins at conception. Those who say life begins at conception base their claim on the assertion that every human life begins with conception. That is true. He has to admit that human life begins with conception. But now he's going to throw a red herring out there for you. The pregnancy failure rate post-conception is well over 70%. Okay, let's talk about that 70%. You don't even have to try to debunk 70%. I don't really care if it's true or not. We shouldn't give fertilized eggs the right to life because 70% of them die before pregnancy occurs. That is the statement. Compare that with the following. Criminals do not have the right to liberty because 76.6% are arrested a second time within 5 years of being released from prison. And 55% are all the way back in prison within 5 years of being released. Does that sound like an acceptable argument, Arthur? The fact that 70% of fertilized eggs never implant, therefore die, according to the conceptionist argument, does not mean it is unreasonable to believe that life begins at fertilization. 100% of babies that are carried to term and are born die. Is this not true? They may live for a week, they may live for 80 years. 100% of babies that are born alive die. Does this mean that they are not really alive when they are born? It is true that women are not emotionally attached to organisms that come out of their bodies that they do not consider a pregnancy. For instance, fertilized eggs that do not implant, and unfertilized eggs. But the degree of emotional attachment does not change the existence of life. The degree of emotional attachment does not matter when an unborn baby is moments from birth or months from birth. Are you following Arthur? Not only has Arthur successfully lost the point with all this talk about statistics, but he's also managed to conflate natural pregnancy progression with manslaughter. I don't think he means to suggest that women are guilty of manslaughter if a fertilized egg fails to implant, but you can certainly infer this, and it's not the last time he's going to make this suggestion. Conceptionalists are trying to make persons out of biological entities that cannot possibly develop for a wide variety of reasons. Along this line of thinking, I have a question. Does the mother know at conception whether or not an egg is fertilized? Does Arthur know? If he does, maybe he should share this information. We should deny all conceived babies the right to life because 70% will not live. And we just can't know which ones that will be. All right, Arthur. 20% of pregnancies, this is implanted fertilized eggs in the uterus, end in miscarriage. We should deny all embryos the right to life because we just don't know ahead of time which babies will be miscarried and which ones won't. Have I demonstrated the absurdity of this 70% crap yet? Come on. But Arthur is just loving conflating natural bodily functions with manslaughter, so he's not done yet. Conception creates more than one life, twins or triplets, but then one of those lives is absorbed into the body of another, fetal resorption. So what? This is an argument for right to life being extended to fertilized eggs, because it could be more than one life being terminated. Are you serious, Arthur? Do you understand the words that are coming out of your mouth? This does not make sense. Okay, we're back from the Forbes article. We're actually going to get into the story that I noticed back on Thursday that has spurred this video. Here is the title. This anti-abortion congressman does not seem to understand how sex works. Okay, Miss Eleanor Sheehan, please expound to us. How exactly is it that Mr. Tenderholt doesn't understand how sex works? Sidebar, this just sounds like a headline written by a stupid normie millennial. From the story, Mr. Tenderholt evidently doesn't understand how sex works either, because it takes two people to conceive a child. A woman cannot be solely responsible for a fetus because of the nature of biology. You're right, Eleanor. It does take two to make a baby. It does. Congratulations, you got that part right. So why is it that women are currently exempted from Texas' current penal code when it comes to abortion? In chapters 19 and 22 of the Texas Penal Code, which relates to homicide and assault, mothers are totally exempted from manslaughter and assault charges committed against their unborn child. Technically speaking, a mother can take whatever measures she wants to abort her baby. She won't be charged with either assault or manslaughter. Here are the portions of the current code. Chapter 19, Section 6. This chapter does not apply to the death of an unborn child if the conduct committed by the mother. Fathers are not exempt, mothers are. It takes two to make a baby, doesn't it, Eleanor? Why do mothers get to be exempted from charges of homicide, but fathers don't? But never mind what the law actually says, never mind what's actually going on in the Texas Penal Code. We can just talk about the rights that feminazis are always complaining and moaning about when it comes to abortion. I'll give you a hint. You get 3 guesses, the first 2 don't count. It's not the father's rights that feminazis are moaning about, and it's not the doctor's rights that feminazis are moaning about. Fathers are already held to account by the fact that they're not exempted from homicide and assault charges against their unborn children. In your words, Eleanor, a man cannot be solely responsible for a fetus because of the nature of biology. And she makes another point that we're going to talk about. She talks about how, quote-unquote, not real easy it is to obtain an abortion in Texas. She mentions that there are only 19 clinics left in Texas due to stringent restrictions on the procedure. Well, you have left a hyperlink there, Mrs. Eleanor. Let's go and have a look at what that says. According to this hyperlink, which is again from the website you're writing from, Texas House Bill 2 closed down about half of the abortion clinics in Texas because doctors performing abortions at clinics must have privileges at local hospitals that allow them to admit their patients in case of emergency. Apparently, half of the abortion clinics in Texas were not willing to comply with this bill. And as you've stated here, clinics must also meet the same standards as hospital-like ambulatory surgical centers. Now, that part of the bill is not being acted upon right now as it's in the hands of the Supreme Court. But that sounds like a couple of things that abortion clinics ought to be held to. If you're going to remove a baby from a woman by surgery, you should probably held to the same surgical standards as a hospital. These are procedures that debatably have potentially terrible consequences for a mother getting an abortion. This doesn't sound like a bad thing. Holding abortion clinics to the same standards that we hold hospitals to. Okay. Whew. That's going to wrap up this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more content, share with your friends, and don't forget to sign up for alerts so that you don't miss a single video. If you want to make a contribution, the links to my PayPal and Patreon pages are in the description below. Don't forget to check me out at mindsandtwitter.com. And as always, good night and God bless.